And he'll be followed by Tony Travers. And Tony, as you all know, is one of the most respected, intellectual, clever voices in the entire offshore world. And I'm sure we're going to hear that articulated through the whole debate today. He's currently senior partner at Travers and Thorpe Alberga in the Cayman Islands. And I think between all of us, we said, why don't more people stand up, and why doesn't the sector stand up and be counted more? And Tony is one of those people that's always been willing to do that, and we look forward to his contribution today.
Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Always a pleasure. As you heard, my name's Anthony Travers. I'm from the Cayman Islands, and I'm here to help you. I'm here to help you understand what on earth it was Mr. Portrayal was thinking when he made his BBC program. It was supposed to be about the Cayman Islands, but it wasn't the Cayman Islands that I recognized. Now, Mr. Portrayal in his synopsis there did not actually cover the points in his BBC program. I hope most of you have seen it. It contained grotesque mischaracterizations about the Cayman Islands, which I recognized immediately as coming straight from the Tax Justice Network playbook, a playbook which, for those of us who work in the offshore financial industry, will understand contains delusional thinking about offshore structuring, most of which is completely and utterly unhinged. Now, I want to be very fair to Mr. Portrayal. I think we will expect that a Guardian journalist will promote the Guardian agenda. The Guardian is a left-wing journal. It is anti-capitalist. It is high tax. And we anticipate that it will promote its own propaganda. Our choice is either to buy the Guardian or not to buy the Guardian. Most people, I can tell you, are not buying the Guardian, but that is not the point I want to make today. The point I want to make today is that whilst we anticipate that from the Guardian, we certainly don't anticipate it from the BBC, which has a charter that requires it to be objective and fact-based. But it also has guidelines for program making, and I'm going to read you one or two of these today, not just for your benefit, but largely for Mr. Portrayal's, because I suspect it's some time since he's seen them. We must do all we can to ensure due accuracy. All BBC output must be well-sourced and based on sound evidence. We should be honest and open about what we don't know. I'm going to read that bit again. We should be honest and open about what we don't know and avoid unfounded speculation. The BBC must not knowingly and materially mislead its audiences. We should not distort known facts, present invented material as fact, or otherwise undermine our audience's trust. Now, with that in mind, I'm going to descend to the detail and expose the 5 fallacies that Mr. Portrayal contained in his BBC production. Firstly, in much the same way as the Tax Justice Network and the OECD have conflated unlawful tax evasion with lawful tax avoidance, we now see a new conflation. We now see the legal right to privacy conflated with secrecy. The legal right to privacy is quite distinct. The legal right to privacy is established by the Vienna Convention. It appears in Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which is incorporated into English law under the Human Rights Act of 1998. We find similar legislation in the United States under the Right to Privacy Act and the Fourth Amendment. The right to privacy in private affairs is legitimate and lawful. It has nothing whatsoever to do with secrecy, and particularly not bank secrecy of the sort that enables unlawful tax evasion. Any first-year journalist could have, from publicly available sources, reviewed the legislative position in the Cayman Islands and established that bank secrecy that enables or facilitates unlawful tax evasion does not apply in the Cayman Islands. He could have gone back to the 1976 Confidential Relationships Preservation Law, which established gateways for lawful criminal investigation in the Cayman Islands. He could have looked at the 1990 Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty, which enabled all crimes anti-money laundering investigation by United States law enforcement authorities through the Department of Justice. He could have looked at the 2000 OECD commitment, which established the same transparency with respect to tax matters, so that the tax authorities of 35 jurisdictions have unrestricted right to obtain all information in the Cayman Islands in relation to any tax matter. And he should therefore have concluded that anyone endeavoring to undertake tax evasion in the Cayman Islands was probably criminally insane or possibly a Guardian reporter. But he didn't do that. What he did was appear from the Royal Bank of Canada with a set of bank mandate forms in his hand, waving them around gleefully, saying, "Look how easy it is to establish an account in the Cayman Islands." But what he didn't say was that had he tried to establish that account in the Cayman Islands, he would have had to produce his address. He would have had to produce 2 references from a bank and a professional. He would have had to produce his passport. And the United Kingdom tax authorities would have known exactly where to find his account. And furthermore, what he didn't say was that under the Common Reporting Standard, all the capital in that account and the interest annually would be reported directly to the United Kingdom tax authorities. So what he didn't say was there is no possibility whatsoever of evading tax in the Cayman Islands or indeed any of the other overseas territories in the offshore jurisdictions. The second fallacy that we need to expose is the suggestion that he made repeatedly in his program that there is no benefit to the people of the Cayman Islands in the offshore financial services industry. This is the purest nonsense. We did not need an expert who no one had ever heard of called Matthews from Washington, D.C. to tell us that the indirect tax system in the Cayman Islands would not work in the United States. Of course it wouldn't. In the United States, you have populist politicians buying boats that they can't afford with benefit programs running up $18 trillion worth of debt. Of course that won't work in the Cayman Islands, but the Cayman Islands indirect tax system works very effectively in the context of the Cayman Islands. It balances its budget annually. It has a very small deficit debt of some aggregate $500 million. But otherwise, as I say, a balanced budget. And it does that through the collection of indirect taxes. And the collection of indirect taxes from the financial services industry in the amount of around $300 million a year actually pays for the services of around 6,500 civil servants, most of whom are Caymanians, pays their salaries, it pays their health benefits, and it pays for free health care. So the financial services industry in the Cayman Islands is of direct benefit to a majority of the Cayman Island working population. The third fallacy that appeared in your program is that there is no benefit to onshore jurisdictions from places like the Cayman Islands. Now, this is the purest nonsense. You have to analyze it, as was suggested to you by Cayman Finance in your interview, industry by industry. But if we look just at the hedge fund industry in the Cayman Islands, in respect to which there is some $2.4 trillion invested currently, you will find that 65% of that is invested in the United States. And by way of that investment, jobs are created in New York and Chicago, where the markets exist. Taxes are paid, and substantial benefits derived from that investment by an onshore jurisdiction. The same can be said of London, less so now because of some misguided European Union legislation which has affected the hedge fund industry in London. The aggregate historically was around $600 billion invested in the City of London. It's now dropped as a result of that legislation to some $350 billion, but nevertheless, that $350 billion directly invested in the United Kingdom provides jobs, it produces tax revenues. The tax revenues pay for teachers, doctors, firemen, and policemen. All of that is as a result of direct investment, and that is simply the hedge fund industry. We can postulate that like amounts are invested directly through the private equity industry and other forms of onshore investment. The fourth fallacy in your program is that in some way taxes are not paid on Cayman Island investment. This is the purest nonsense. All Cayman Island investors anticipate that monies will be invested immediately. You do not find investors investing $2 trillion of money who do not anticipate an immediate return. Unless you're Mr. Dart, building hotels in the Cayman Islands and deriving profits from the local economy, the whole $2.4 trillion you can reckon is invested immediately in onshore jurisdictions and is therefore taxed in accordance with the laws of those onshore jurisdictions. I gave you the rough split between the United States and the United Kingdom a moment ago. I won't repeat it. But those jurisdictions have very specific legislation, tax legislation, which says here is how we will tax offshore investment into our markets, and it is so taxed. Furthermore, when those profits are distributed by the Cayman Island Fund to investors, they are taxed in accordance with their laws of jurisdiction, residence, or domicile. And since most of the investors in the Cayman Islands are institutional and not retail, we know very well that those taxes are paid in accordance with those laws. And we will actually find, this is a prediction from me, when you see the Common Reporting Standard introduced, you will find that the tax revenues of the onshore jurisdictions do not increase by 1 red cent as a result of investments made in and through the Cayman Islands, because taxes have already been paid on all investments made through Cayman Island vehicles into onshore jurisdictions. The last fallacy that I want to expose, and I may take just 2 more minutes because it's a complicated one, which you did touch on, Mr. Peretti, and that is the confusion that surrounds lawful tax avoidance. You didn't help this suggestion in the program you made by conflating 2 or 3 different sorts of tax avoidance. You have to be very, very specific when you're looking at tax avoidance. There are many different sorts, but let's just look at 2 sorts. The first is the tax avoidance that exists in the Google, Starbucks, Amazon type situation. Now, what I want to say firstly is, if you're going to understand tax avoidance, you need to understand this. All tax avoidance, all lawful tax avoidance, is by definition a function of onshore legislation, not offshore legislation. It must necessarily be the case that the onshore laws are the laws where the tax avoidance is practiced. And so when we look at the Google Starbucks type structure, what we see 2 things. We see, firstly, as you alluded to in your opening remarks, in relation to your comments made by Google Starbucks executives, that the problem is that the double tax treaty networks, and let me say also that these are necessarily between onshore jurisdictions, not the offshore jurisdiction. Cayman Islands and the other overseas territories are no tax havens. They do not have double tax treaties. So the tax avoidance we are talking about is necessarily a function of double tax treaty jurisdictions which reside within Europe. We're talking primarily about Ireland, we're talking primarily about Luxembourg and the Netherlands. The problem is that the double tax treaties, which the OECD spent 20 years enjoying their tax-free salaries in Paris developing, don't actually work. They certainly don't work in relation to intellectual property. And they specifically don't work for a second reason, because jurisdictions in the European Union, particularly Ireland, have gamed the system. The double Irish structure with the Dutch overlay is entirely a function of onshore domestic legislation. It works highly effectively. But it's not a function of offshore law at all, and it certainly isn't a function of the Cayman Islands legislation or the Cayman Islands structuring. Now, if we listen very carefully, we can hear a noise. That noise is the tax justice network jumping up and down in unison. There are only 3 of them, but they're very, very noisy. And they're saying, but wait a minute, don't the profits from the Google, Amazon structuring end up in the Cayman Islands or Bermuda? Well, they might do, but after the tax has been avoided in the onshore jurisdiction. And the reason they end up in the Cayman Islands or Bermuda is for a quite different reason. And that reason relates to United States taxation. Because United States taxation has a modified capital import neutrality system, which enables, much though the Democrats hate it, which enables a control foreign corporation structure and deferred taxation. And the reason why it has that is because the United States legislators, in their wisdom in 1962, decided that US corporations should be enabled to compete more effectively by having deferred taxation. And that deferred taxation structure, I can see Bruce nodding up and down very excitedly here. That deferred taxation structure only works where you have a jurisdiction like the Cayman Islands, where taxes can be deferred tax-free, but in accordance with United States law. What United States law is saying is we want our corporations to be globally competitive. We don't want them to pay double rates of tax. We want them to be able to defer taxation on certain sorts of income, which is not subpart F income, but genuine trading activity with unrelated parties. And that control foreign corporation legislation is in effect, and it is lawfully in effect in the Cayman Islands and works in conjunction with the US legislation as it was intended to work. Much as the Democrats don't like it, much as it upsets Bernie Sanders, much as it upsets Carl Levin, much as it upsets President Obama, the problem is they can't legislate to change it. One day they may, but up to now they have not been able to. So if you really have a problem, I'm going to wind up now, open it to questions. If you really have a problem, Mr. Peretti, with the way structuring in the Cayman Islands works, you and Meg Hillier of the Public Accounts Committee, who ludicrously grilled Matt Britton, the Google executive, have got to look in the mirror. Because you are the people that vote. You elect your politicians. Your politicians, including Meg Hillier on the Public Accounts Committee, legislate. And if you don't like the way taxes are lawfully avoided, you need to change your domestic legislation and stop pointing fingers at places like the Cayman Islands. I'm also very optimistic that the mischaracterizations, the half-truths, the omissions, the misportrayals of jurisdictions like the Cayman Islands with regard to tax matters must fall away in the light of the complete transparency now introduced by FATCA, by the Common Reporting Standard. And so that we will, in the fullness of time, have a much better understanding of the general population at large in the onshore centers, onshore jurisdictions, about just how valuable a role jurisdictions like the Cayman Islands play in the international financial architecture.